So my love of nature started when I was a child, and my mom would take my brother and I on these hikes through the Blue Hills. And when we would go on these hikes, I used to pretend that I was a park ranger, and I knew the names of all of the plants and the animals that we encountered. And that was my playground growing up, was running around those woods and those hills. And that's where the love of nature began. And then later, when I was 14, I began working as a student worker at a program called the Food Project in Boston, Massachusetts. And it was basically a farm out in the suburbs of Lincoln, Massachusetts, and also an urban farm in Boston where all kinds of teens would come and work. And it was my very first summer job. So that's when I really got the bug for agriculture in particular, and I continued working there throughout my high school. So I initially went to school for environmental science and figured out after a while that I wasn't really getting the education that I wanted. I wasn't getting that hands-on interaction with plants that I hoped for. So when I left Spelman, I then moved back to Boston and I began working in the field. I worked as a landscaper. I worked on different urban farms throughout Boston as well as in Atlanta. And I worked at a number of food justice organizations doing a lot of educational programming. So while I was at Spelman, I studied for a semester in Panama. It was part of a tropical and human ecology conservation course that I was taking. And so I was in Panama for an entire semester, traveled from one end of that country to the other, and really got to engage with the different groups and communities that were in Panama while learning about the natural ecosystems as well and human interactions with those ecosystems. So for my final weeks in the course, when we did our independent projects, I chose to stay with my favorite host family that were living in the mountain region that's predominantly agricultural. And so I studied the effects and impacts of erosion on those mountainous slopes on agriculture and the ways that farmers in that region were coping with it. I studied abroad in Brazil when I was in high school, and that experience was part of an introduction to permaculture course that I took over the course of a summer. And so permaculture is a philosophy of sustainable agriculture that focuses on living systems and mimics a lot of indigenous practices of agriculture. So I studied that for about 2 months in Brazil. I was living and working in Boston when I decided to move to Philadelphia, in part because Philadelphia and Pennsylvania in general has such a large horticultural industry, and I saw that there would be a lot of opportunities for me if I moved to Philadelphia. So I chose to move to Philadelphia and find a job, but it wasn't too long after I started working that I realized that my opportunities would be a lot greater if I went back to school and got my bachelor's. So I chose Temple. And a big part of the reason that I chose Temple is because Temple Ambler has this beautiful arboretum that I was privileged to study at. We have this beautiful greenhouse that I'm currently standing in, and a lot of hands-on and practical experience that I was able to take advantage of. So I started working at True Love Seeds as an apprentice seed grower. Because I really wanted to learn about the practice of seed keeping and to make that the focus of my agricultural career. And seed keeping is the practice of saving seeds for future generations that are culturally important, that have that cultural resonance and are important to communities historically and today. And seed keeping is also about preserving and sharing the stories that go along with those seeds. Ever since I began farming, agriculture has always been an opportunity for me to both connect with the land and also to connect with my ancestry. And as an African American woman, connecting with my African ancestors, those who were enslaved and those who were in Africa, has been a really important part of healing myself, healing trauma within myself. And so for me, seed keeping was that logical next step that allowed me to deepen my agricultural and ancestral practice in a way that allowed me to carry on those traditions of my ancestors before me who were farmers and seed keepers themselves. So I started working at Greens Grow last summer, thanks to one of my fellow students here at Temple who let me know about the opportunity to work there, and I started working there as a farmer. And this year, Greensboro has asked me to come back as the 2021 Seedkeeping resident. And basically this gives me the opportunity to share everything I have learned about seedkeeping with the community, with others. So in my position, I am working with about 9 fellows from the community, from different backgrounds, cultural, ethnic, community backgrounds, that I am working with to teach the ins and outs of seed saving as a practice, of cultural seed keeping throughout the entire season. So seed saving is the very literal practice of growing a plant for seed and then taking the seeds from the plant and processing them and storing them so that you can use them in the future. Now seed keeping incorporates seed saving, but it takes that practice a little bit further in that it emphasizes the cultural traditions and the stories that go along with those seeds and make them so uniquely important to us. Part of the reason I even decided that I could go back to school was because Temple made the transfer process so incredibly easy. I worked with an advisor over at main campus who really showed me that with all of the coursework and life experiences that I had previously done, it wasn't going to be challenging for me to get credit for that work and to enter in at Temple with the credit that I had already received. I think one of the best parts about the classroom experience at Temple, at least until COVID happened and things changed, is that the classroom experience here has been very hands-on. I've really had the opportunity to work in this greenhouse, for example, and to get some of that hands-on experience. And in a lot of my classes as well, we've had the opportunity to interact with professionals from the horticultural industry around Philadelphia, which is incredibly vast, and there's such a range of horticultural professions out there that I honestly may not have had the chance to really explore or understand before coming here. So we've had the opportunity to go on field trips to commercial nurseries and greenhouses and to ask questions from people who are in this field. And I think that experience has been really invaluable. I think real-world experience, especially in this major, but I'm sure in many others, is one of the most important things, especially when it comes to getting a job. I do think that while getting a degree is invaluable, without that real-world experience, without having had some of that practical experience in the field, it'd be really difficult for me to get a job and to be able to step into the roles that I've been able to step into. And so I think that getting that hands-on experience is necessary, especially for horticulture. My experience at Temple, but in particular Temple Ambler, has been incredibly positive, and my favorite parts of that have been the interactions I've been able to have between my fellow students, who are all incredibly brilliant and coming from such diverse backgrounds, as well as my brilliant professors, many of whom work at the Arboretum or work in the library, work in the greenhouse, and have been able to impart so much of their knowledge. And I think those human connections that I've been able to make, the friends that I'm hoping I'll take with me beyond my graduation, are the best parts of this experience overall. As soon as I graduate, I will be going from a part-time position at Greensboro to a full-time position at Greensboro, and I will be continuing to work as the seed-keeping resident. And in the future beyond that, my goal is to have a farm of my own where I can focus on seed keeping and saving the seeds of the African diaspora, which are the crops that are most important to me, and continuing to educate people about them. There's no one experience. There's no formula for this journey. You have to take it for yourself. You have to wander and take the road not followed. And I think it's really important, as I've already said, to get that experience outside of the classroom, to try to get that hands-on, real-world internship or job or whatever it takes, so that you're really prepared when graduation happens and life hits.